said we shouldn't do wine. I'm going to get the boring stuff over with at the start, if that's okay, which is welcome. Please go to the UK and a Changing Europe website, sign up for our newsletter, follow us on Twitter, or we'll never invite you to one of these events ever again. All right? Secondly, the first bit of humour this evening is when these slides fail to work. We decided to be brave and do a slightly wacky way of introducing our guest tonight, starting with Mr. Andy Zaltzman, with no sound. You see, this is... Read the subtitles.
Leave and remain was always going to be difficult. So let me put it in terms that your Australian viewers might comprehend, Charlie. If you are a parent and you have twins, and one twin really likes cricket, but the other twin really likes platypuses, and you come up with a compromised birthday treat that involves going to watch someone hit platypuses with a cricket bat, you're going to have two disappointed children. That's a difficult question.
That's Zaltzman on the Brexit compromise. Next, Mr. Nish Kumar.
No deal does not get Brexit
Read that
done.
bit.
According to a report by think tank UK and a Changing Europe, we'd have to spend even more time and resources negotiating new trade agreements, which the government's own Operation Yellowhammer says could end up happening against a background of food and medicine shortages, as well as sudden widespread unemployment and even rioting. Seeing no deal Brexit as a way of getting Brexit done is a bit like thinking, I need a shit. I know, I'll do it in my pants. And that way it's done and I can get on with my day and never have to think about it again. Oh.
I don't like the immediate juxtaposition of myself against an image of me when I've had a professional hair and makeup team go at me.
Now, we don't have clips of Marina, so we're going to do something a bit different with her. You all know Marina Hyde. What we're going to do is play a little guessing game with Marina. We've got some of her lines on political individuals, and we're going to play Guess That Politician. Can everyone read that? Do you want me to read it out?
The Westminster equivalent one of those.
Oh, I know that one.
The Westminster...
I've got it.
Who do you reckon that is?
Oh, they could be right there.
Is it Francois?
There seems to be a consensus.
I'm so sorry.
All right.
And that's just one from an infinite cage of monkeys. To
Announced that the speech will be taking place ahead of the NATO summit in secret.
She's very wordy, isn't she?
I've got nothing here. I've got nothing.
I can't remember writing this.
I can't remember anything I've written for 3.5 years.
Is that Rob? Steve, Liz Truss, maybe?
You're also bloody Remainian, aren't you? It doesn't have to be a Brexiter.
Oh, is it Trucker?
Yeah.
And finally...
That's Rob.
The first sentence.
That's Rob. Surely that's Rob.
He's killed and will again.
It's Rob, right?
What's in his lockup? What's in his lockup? Is this being broadcast?
Okay.
There we go.
So welcome all. We're going to make this semi-serious because I've actually got some serious questions for you, and if you wreck it, I'll be very upset. So, I mean, first thing, Brexit has been very, very good for you all, hasn't it?
Oh, it's been good for business.
Well, it's been good for us too.
It's been very good for business.
Yeah.
I believe it is good for business because it's been good for business. I think that's just a...
And we'll continue to be good for business.
Is this the
All
night you
businesses.
come out as a
Yeah.
rabid Brexiter, Marina?
Some things have turned me quite a hard Brexit, but most things have not.
What's really turned you hard Brexit?
Nish is hosting all.
That guy Charlie Mullins, the Pimlico Plumbers guy, at the High Court challenge for one of the things, when he just got his personalised Bentley and just like parked it up on the pavement outside the High Court. Hard Brexit. Hard. Immediately. Do it now. Today.
But you've benefited from it, you too.
Oh, mate, I fucking coined it in. me and disaster capitalists have made out like bandits from the Brexit process.
Well, it's good to monetise the death of your children's hopes and dreams.
it's not just Brexit, is it? I mean, you've also profited from the fact that there has been no opposition.
Yeah.
Speaking of, I mean,
Some
in a
valuable
sense-
balance there.
In a sense,
Labour
you lot
also
have acted as a sort of opposition, haven't you? Where
There's it has no effect on anything. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
No joke will ever have an effect on anything at all. That's just like one of the golden rules.
Yeah, because it's not like, to be absolutely fair, it's not like somebody who voted Leave is like, I wonder what Nish Kumar thinks. Let me see what his hot take is on the subject. You've become very aware of the fact that you're largely preaching to the converted, and you start to see your job less as a sort of active changer of minds and more as a release valve for a demographic of society that has taken an absolute pasting in the last 4 years, I guess.
Yeah, because I mean, I've done some really quite pertinent satire about Brexit on my podcast, and it's made little or even no difference for whatever reason. So, but I think that, I mean, there is, it is largely cathartic, I think, on a broad scale. I think when you see satire having some effect, it's often, smaller, more niche single issues, like a lot of the stuff John Oliver does in America, where you can really home in on one thing that has almost an achievable end, and at least change the way that it's seen or discussed in public. But in terms of, I think, a big thing like Brexit, it's as Nish said, it's bubble against bubble essentially, and there's not been a lot of osmosis between the bubbles over the years.
I'm definitely, on my job in the last 4 years has essentially been the conductor of a large-scale leftist circle jerk. And,
oh God. Okay, let me catch my breath. But has it been like this before, where you've just felt you're only talking to half the population and you can only be talking to... I mean, is this totally new? I mean, it might not be new for you, I mean, you're right.
Lots of things were funny just for everyone. It was funny when Michael Howard threatened war with Spain. That's just something everyone can enjoy. Everyone can get in that.
But seriously, does this feel different to anything that went before in your comedic careers? Were you as political before?
Well, I think I probably started doing political stuff in about 2001, 2002, just as I started doing stand-up. It took me a couple of years to have the confidence to do it. But I just did it because that was the comedy I'd always enjoyed the most, really. So I don't think it made me more political as a comedian. But in terms of it having a broader impact, that's very much to do with the size and reach of your audience. So as I've skillfully managed my career to avoid a large, wide-ranging audience, I've not had to deal with that issue. But I mean, we go back to, shows that having a big radio or TV audience have more of a chance of reaching beyond that bubble. And I studied ancient Greek comedy as part of a very poorly executed degree, and the satirical comedies were played out to all parts of society, excluding all women and slaves. But apart from that, it was the educated, the uneducated, the working class, the upper class, the political classes. So that's that you might say you're reaching almost the entire population there. But that was a small period of time with a 30,000 strong voting population. It was rather different to how things are now. But I think it very much depends on the scope of your audience. So,
but isn't it global as well? It's really interesting what's happened with something like American Late Night, where if you look back to the sort of era of someone like Letterman, when you've got people from all sides of the political divide watching Late Night. But now, when you see the hosts now, you see even people like Stephen Colbert, there's no real sense, after Trump's victory, it was presented as a sort of, like a wake. There was a mourning. There's no real sense that anybody who voted for Trump is tuning into it at all. It's much more siloed than it ever was. And there aren't those people who kind of cross to all sides, which is definitely a change.
But I always think that's a stylistic thing, because Letterman and Conan were and Johnny Carson were quite intrinsically apolitical comedians. I think the decision to replace David Letterman with Stephen Colbert, that was, you were never going to get a sort of an All Lives Matter satire show from Colbert. I think that decision, but there are still people, I would say someone like Jimmy Fallon is maybe sort of the closest thing to that, like somebody who's sort of trying to, I think he did it in quite a ham-fisted way by ruffling Trump's hair, but I think he is still, through whatever success you think he's achieving, he is still trying to broadcast to across. It's
very different now, though, that most of them are totally. Very clearly on one side, which they never used to be.
But do you think there's a danger that, I don't know what label to use, liberal, left-wing, Remainy comedy is a little bit sneery and snobby? Just on,
no.
So, think back to last Friday night. There were, and that lovely crowd in Parliament Square.
Yeah.
A lot of the commentary just seemed...
Oh, I thought it was horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the way people talked about it was awful. I thought people were so kind of snooty and
very condescending, very sort of...
Just really aggressive. It's like that moment when, you've become the thing you hate. Yeah. You're no better, really, than anything that you think that you're sneering down at. I thought it was awful, absolutely dreadful. That people couldn't see that they were doing it.
Yeah, and also sneering at drunk people. You're like, fucking hell, how... I'm not patriotic, but sneering at drunk people is un-British.
We can't get into that. Yeah, we cannot get into that in this country.
You can't. I don't think you can open that Pandora can on whatever side of the political divide you're on. If you're looking at someone going, he's drunk on television, you're like, that is a slippery slope.
One of the curious things about Friday night, actually, because we were in Parliament Square and you had the people there with the flags, and the sort of second ring of people were a bunch of mainly European tourists speaking French, Italian, Spanish, filming them. And it was just slightly surreal to watch, It's like, this is the Britain of today. But, just tell me, do you have a sense on this? I was a little bit sort of, I think, annoyed. There is research out there, we've done research that shows Remainers are more intolerant than Leavers now.
Yeah.
And that's not great, is it?
No, I don't know what that specific research was, obviously, but...
it was our research.
Yeah, but I don't know what questions are you asking? But in terms of,
on our website.
What questions you want? But I guess
things not to say.
But the losing... No, but in terms of, what questions were you asking, or how?
All
right. But I guess that's the losing side. Generally, is a little more intolerant and knocked off, and there's a lot of sneering from not necessarily in comedy, because there isn't that much sort of pro-Brexit comedy, but from columnists, from the sneering works both ways, and it's.
Is it sledging, Andy?
It's
oh, here we go.
It's print sledging. I think that's essentially what most kind of comment pieces are these days. Essentially, trolling and triggering, and that sort of works both ways. But it's certainly a challenge in comedy to try to avoid that, and not necessarily go for the easy joke or the angry joke, and try and find a more palatable way of presenting it, because. Yeah, if you talking about speaking within your own bubble, if you do have that sort of sneering, patronising attitude, whatever side you're on, then it is going to alienate people who don't agree with you. So if you're looking to, at least make people listen who wouldn't necessarily agree with you, I think you do have to think, how can I present whatever comic, satirical point in a way that doesn't just piss people off.
Which brings us to the Lord's Taverners quite simply, I think. Niche?
No comment. This is a reference to a gig I did in December, which was not my finest hour. Interestingly, not my worst gig, but it was, I don't mean to brag, but I'm quite bad at my job.
The Andover Lights, was it?
Yeah, the Andover Lights. Andy and I did a gig at the Andover Lights where I was the opening act and he was the headliner. And let me tell you, they were not buying what we were selling. It was in the foyer of the Andover Lights Theatre.
A brightly lit foyer, and I don't think I've ever seen such a high proportion of an audience with folded arms.
Why were you in the foyer and not on...
No idea. They put us in the foyer because...
Listen, hindsight is 20/20, Marina.
Yeah.
And it turns out a theatre is a better venue for a gig than a cafe. But we could only have found that out by doing the data.
But were you taken aback by what happened?
Okay. I've not really spoken that much in public about this thing. So
we have to talk about it if you don't want to.
No, I'm perfectly happy to talk about it. On the 2nd of December, I did there's a charity luncheon that's run by the Lords Taverners, who are a charity based out of Lords Cricket Ground, and they do incredible work providing sporting equipment for disabled and disadvantaged children. It's a charity that I've done work with before, and they asked me to do every year they have a charity luncheon in December, and I have attended that as a guest of the charity. And so I know that the crowd is, let's say, not my constituency. It was definitely an away fixture, and an away fixture in, it was like an away fixture in like West Indies in the late 70s playing cricket. Like it was like, it's a tough trip. And when they asked me to do it, I did think I should probably say no. And then part of me thought, I toured the whole of last year. When we do the BBC show, amazing as this will be to people who are critics, we do work really hard to try and make sure we understand that we're on the BBC and we have a responsibility to broadcast to the entire nation. Whereas when I do stand-up, I'm much more partisan because I'm not receiving licence fee subsidy to do my live shows. So I can be quite partisan and at times aggressive, because I saw very much my role in that live show that I was doing as being a sort of release valve for a lot of people who have had a difficult few years. And so that's the kind of stand-up material that I have about Brexit. And I just thought, if you're willing to go and perform in front of people who already agree with you and are delighted to see you and are excited by what you're saying, you should be willing to do that material in front of people who aren't necessarily willing to, who maybe don't start on the same page. It was also 10 days before the general election, and so it felt a bit like that. We're sat there talking about why there's not enough money available for disabled children, and the idea that the elephant in the room is the Prime Minister, and the actions of the government since 2010. And so I kind of knew what I was doing, to an extent. And if you're not willing to speak to people who don't agree with you, and you're not willing to say the things that you say about them behind their back, then maybe you're a bit cowardly. Okay. And so what I'm saying is, I'm a fucking cunt. And there's a part of me that there's always a part of me that is, all right, you laughed a bit too hard at that, Salzman.
Truth to power.
There's a part of me that's like, there's an element of me that thinks you should be willing to say things to people that don't agree with you. What I didn't realise, it went badly. No getting away from it. Can I just clarify? There was one bread roll. Can you be pelted by one of I'm not getting into a semantic debate here, but if someone said it's pelting it down outside and you walked out and were hit by one raindrop, you go, you're a fucking idiot, mate. So it was one bread roll, and it was a sort of...
One's too many.
It was listen, one is definitely more bread rolls than is ideal. But afterwards, it was kind of fine. I went and got drunk with my friends, and it was all fine. What took me aback slightly was the level of press interest. Yeah. It was the level, and that's sort of where we are at the moment. Is that everything Brexit, which is your purview. It's complicated trade agreements. It's an academic discussion, but it has ascended to this plane of almost religious fundamentalism. Yeah. And you're not. What we're having is not a conversation about boring trade agreements and the common agricultural policy and fishing treaties. What we're having is a conversation about the very soul of what we consider our nation to be, and that it's invested what should be quite a boring conversation with kind of religious fervour that it can't really support. And so sometimes you find yourselves in the middle of, yourself in the middle of a culture war, and I don't really know what to do with that. That's the kind of struggle. Every morning I wake up and worry that I'm making everything worse. That's the truth of everything that, since I started doing the MASH report, every morning I wake up and think, am I the problem? And then I turn on my Twitter feed and find out I am in fact the problem.
But Marina, could you do what you do for the Daily Telegraph, and keep its readers?
Dear Marina Hyde, I am cancelling my Telegraph subscription.
There'd be less swearing, I think. But I mean, people like jokes. Some papers don't have actually any jokes in. The Telegraph's got jokes in. Michael Deacon writes great jokes in the Telegraph. So some papers just don't like any jokes at all. But that one has, I mean, I don't think I would be able to write a lot of the swear words, if I'm really honest, or suggest that like cabinet ministers had dead girls in lockups and stuff. I mean, I don't know. I've not spoken to the person who's the editor.
Could you do it the other way, sort of target your fire the other way for a
Oh yeah, I mean, I now just feel much more sort of equal opportunities on all of it, much more like South Park, like everyone's been sent mad by this. On all sides there's been terrible behaviour, and it's much more funny in a way to just sort of see how it's all going to shake down now and just see. I mean, so many people it's been like this great sort of mad centrifuge that all sorts of people who are actually, you'd think, were quite sort of, I don't know whether they be lawyers or historians, have just gone, whoa, out to the side. And now they're just complete extremists who do crazy things. And I mean, maybe they'll come down and calm down now. Or maybe I think this is where we live now, though. I think we live in a mad place now.
I mean, one of the curiosities of this is, like, on the BBC now, they feel the need to, which we haven't done, maybe that was my oversight, you know, we need to have a right-wing comedian on this show or it's not balanced. I mean, it's a bit weird, isn't it?
Yeah, we were just having a conversation
always
about
like
this
that?
now.
Well, the BBC was always, well, in my experience, very concerned with balance. I worked on a show on BBC Three in 2003 that coincided with the start of the Iraq War, and we'd written some jokes about George W. Bush, and it came back from the BBC powers, described as upstairs in BBC Talk, which I assume was Enid the cleaner upstairs. But it said, upstairs says, well, you've got to balance out. If you make a joke against George W. Bush, you've also got to make a joke against Saddam Hussein. You think, well, can we not just assume that people think he's a little bit off beam? And so there was, you know, even, you know, then there was a, you know, this sense that, you know, is good in many ways, that there has to be balance. And the difficulty in comedy is that, you know, political comedy tends to come not necessarily from the left, but it tends to be anti-establishment, and so that there aren't as many sort of pro-government or pro-conservative or pro-authority comedians.
I mean, it's not always been balanced, has it? I remember us crowding around the telly on Christmas Day to watch Jim Davidson make Packy jokes on BBC One.
Yeah, yeah.
Thinking, hello, this is weird. We were in a minority at the time, but I mean, it's not always. They've not always felt the need to say, well, if we've got Jim Davidson, we should have someone who isn't a racist as well. I mean,
I am history's balancing act.
But everything now is, you know, that all programmes, they want to have conflict now, and that's actually quite a new thing. They used to, in the early days of like reality TV, they would always get people, you know, who can cause conflict. They want to get, well, one person, they'll have a row in the Big Brother house, let's have them. But now I think those conventions, then they started being on the sort of morning magazine shows where, you know, like, oh, I'm opening up a museum to dedicate this. I disagree, there are too many museums. And that now everything is, with the only programme we know how to make anymore is just two awful people arguing with each other. It's really extraordinary. And actually I don't think it's any surprise that the biggest star of that reality TV era is now in the White House, because all of that it's become our politics. You know, I don't think you did always have to have one person shouting at each other, but it's cheap telly, isn't it? I had to watch the news for 3 days when Trump came over, like rolling news, which I don't, and I had to watch it like round the clock. It sends you completely mad. But it was just a series of panels of 3 different people, all different threes, like some Sartrean version of who would have the biggest fight. And they were just having a lovely time up on the news gantry outside Buckingham Palace, just all arguing with each other. But it was 3 days of it. Why is that news programming? I have no idea. It's cheap, and it's you know.
so you're saying our future is basically Ash Sarkar and Tom Harwood forever?
Yeah, stamping down on your face like a big boot.
Okay.
But also I think that the notions of balance have become, the very idea of balance itself has become corrupted, because, you know, on the subject of something like climate change, it's not representative of the scientific community to have one person who believes in it and one person who doesn't believe in it. And yet now we're constantly told that that is the way that, and, you know, to be honest, in a lot of the coverage leading up to the Brexit vote, it meant that you constantly had to have I think it hobbled a lot of the discourse around Brexit in the lead up to the vote. The idea that you had to constantly be talking about one side thinks this and one side thinks that, and it gets you away from just the facts of what's actually happening. It gets you away from the detail, and it's one of the things that we try and do with the show is the MASH report. Again, amazing. I can't even fucking believe I'm saying this, but we spend a lot of time reading about the subjects. And it's a level of rigour that we are forced into, because you can't just go on the BBC and say, if we Brexit, every third person is going to get eaten by Boris Johnson. Like, we're not allowed to say that.
That's an exaggeration, though, isn't it? It's only about 20.
Yeah, it's decimation. Like, it's not, it's not crazy. Which is why we're quoting your research, because we try and start from a place of facts and reason.
We're fantastic.
And also, you're all fantastic.
There we go.
Yeah.
They don't all work with us.
Oh, right, sorry.
Right. Some of them we don't know.
Some of you are fantastic.
Yeah, right, okay.
Some of you, I imagine, are fucking waste of space.
So, but
This is the sort of thing that upset the taverners, I think. Like,
we're giving out bread rolls at half time.
and we're referring to it as half time as well. Which
Absolutely.
I like.
Yeah.
Got the tea interval. That'll trigger you.
Do you think there's a danger that comedians or columnists or people who sort of laugh at politics breed the sort of cynicism that leads everyone to think they're all the bloody same, they're all useless? I mean, we live in an age where faith in politics is at very low levels, where
if it helps, faith in journalists is even.
Oh, no, it is, absolutely. Now, I was going to get on to that.
We're down there with like estate agents and like serial sex killers and stuff. I think
you're below estate agents.
Yeah.
Actually,
We're down there in the real, the unmentionable.
The thing is, everyone listens to you. It's a weird thing.
So I don't think that. No.
You don't think it contributes?
Well, I mean, but what if an estate agent told you that Boris Johnson was a bit of a git? What would you? You might already know that.
That's like shooting the messenger, though, isn't it?
There's no harm in that.
I think the reason people are disengaged with politics is, or feel that politicians are substandard is probably because a lot of them are, I'm not sure that's something you can particularly worry about if you are a satirist or columnist.
Okay. I mean, in Ukraine, they have a TV comedian in charge of the country now. Do you think that's something we should try and emulate? I mean,
100%.
Arguably, so do we.
Yeah. Well,
what are the transferable skills between your trade and Boris Johnson's?
Successful deception. But I guess it's putting across a message in an entertaining and accessible way, which is
so like Jeremy
essentially
Corbyn.
what comedy is. But you see, there's a degree of similarity between stand-up and what Trump and Boris Johnson do. Just the end purpose is slightly different.
So in a sense, politics has got more similar to comedy recently.
Yes, I think so.
Did you want to say something about Jeremy Corbyn?
No, I can't. It's too soon.
But he's still there.
Maybe later. He's still got another 2 months. We're only halfway in this process.
Yes. Odd time for the Labour Party to hibernate.
Oh.
Luckily, the Democrats are really leading the way. Thank God for the Democrat Party making us appreciate. Like, I watched the Iowa caucus and I was like, you know what? Come back, Labour. All is forgiven.
But it's kind of still going on, isn't it, the Iowa caucus? I mean, they haven't quite
yeah. There was an app-based failure and a bunch of people are running to corners in a church, and that's how we're going to defeat a neo-Nazi in the White House.
Right, you were talking about your Twitter feed. I mean, you must all get your fair share of abuse. Which side reacts more aggressively to you in this culture war?
I have only got. I don't think I get that much abuse at all, and I've never blocked or muted anybody on it. But I find that the one thing that you will never ever have someone on the right or a Tory or anyone complain about a joke. The most amount of complaints come from people on the left. You shouldn't have made that joke. That is not a subject for joking. You get no complaints from anyone on the right. They're absolutely fine with people making jokes. The left is always. There are so many people who will write to you and say you shouldn't have made that joke. That's not a subject for joking. actually, by telling that joke, really you're just making, you're signing up to austerity. It's incredibly judgmental, and you get it all the time.
I would search for my name on Twitter if you're looking for right-wing people complaining about jokes. That is...
I will now. I've enjoyed that.
In my experience,
yeah.
That is not a community that can take a joke. Online or indeed in person, as my yeast-based friend can attest to. My experience of it is, you occasionally get picked up by, we made jokes about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and we were accused, and I'm sort of accused of, I've been accused of propping up an Israeli conspiracy, to which I would always say the best way to diffuse allegations of anti-Semitism is by being anti-Semitic. That's definitely the way you should go under that circumstance. We're not anti-Semitic, you've just been tricked by Jews. It's quite astonishing when you see that happen. But I would say the volume, the extent to which the sections, not really even just online, but large sections of the conservative press have been unable to take jokes that have been delivered out of my mouth is fairly extraordinary. And in the last sort of 5 days, I've been pretty consistently told to go back to where I fucking came from. And, Wandsworth is nice. So, it's not really the worst thing in the world. They've really done up tooting in the last 5 years, but I sense that that's not what they mean.
But do you think that's partly because you work for the Beeb and there's a parallel thing going on, isn't there?
I am a triple threat to these people, and only one of those threats is ISIS. It's brown dude on the BBC. Yeah. Being left wing, there's a whole sort of cornucopia of issues people have with the things that I say, but for me the problem isn't necessarily the sort of tweets, because you can kind of turn off your phone, you can sort of disengage from that to an extent. The interesting thing for me is the critiques from the right-wing commentariat, and the sense is very much that I'm not making any jokes. And, someone like Andrew Neil, Piers Morgan, they're all people that have written about me in a way that suggests that they can't identify comedy in what I do. And this is a problem with comedy, is that if someone doesn't think you're doing it well, they think that it is not comedy. And, this is a joke I used to do, but if you're a builder and you build a wall, people go, that's a good wall, or that's a shit wall. No one says, that is not a wall, right? Whereas the problem with comedy is that it becomes a zero sum. Yeah. Well, they do with Trump, and so the sort of the volley of abuse that I've received has very much been coordinated by a string of very high-profile conservative columnists, and those fuckers cannot take a joke. And given what is on top of Andrew Neil's fucking head, you would have thought that man would have a sense of humour about it. The creature that died and gave him that is laughing in heaven, I'll tell you that much.
No one's mean to you, are they?
I don't do stuff that's high profile enough to draw that level of ire generally.
You aspire to be abused.
And the most abuse I got was for an ill-advised tweet about an India-Pakistan cricket match. Which
now I'm angry with you.
Got a million replies.
I suggested the winner would get to keep Kashmir. And that, I rapidly found out, was not a subject for comedy. So... no, in fact, it wasn't even that. It was that the loser, as compensation, would get to keep Kashmir because the winner already had it. So anyway, the point is that taught me a lesson early in my Twitter career. It was the 2011 Cricket World Cup semi-final, and I learned there's time and a place. But I think also with what Nish was saying, I mean, again, a lot of it is about what platforms you're using. So I do a podcast. You're talking to people who've actively decided to listen to it. radio or television is going out to a broader audience. People can sort of accidentally chance upon something that they haven't made a necessarily conscious choice to watch, or they feel that they've paid for it through their license fee or whatever. So it's a very different relationship with an audience, and people are they're more likely not to like it, because generally if you don't like a podcast, just don't listen to it again and you forget about it. But the radio's on and you hear something and it annoys you, and then you get angry about it because you think, I've paid my money for this. But it was interesting when they announced they put out a press release for Nish and me and Angela Barnes are sharing the hosting of the news quiz this year, and you get complaints about jokes people think you are going to make, not even the jokes that you have made. They expect 9 months from now you're going to do a joke that they don't like. And also there's the complaints about the licence fee. So why am I paying my £154 a year for this? And well, A, radio you don't have to pay a licence fee for, and B, even if you take it pro rata, the entire news quiz for an entire year is less than 1 pence of each licence fee. But people have this perception that the licence fee is, all their money is going on everything they're watching or listening to at that time. Another problem with this sort of side of comedy and people criticising jokes is that what you have is, it's legitimate, obviously, not to like a joke, to disagree with it, to think it is inappropriate or in bad taste. But what you then have when it's then reported is people see the reported version of the joke and take offence to that. So when the thing that came out from Nish's Lord Taverner's thing about was it inviting to go home and kill your white parents or something?
No, so this is this is sort of another thing where this is another layer of problems that you have where that's a misreported thing that first of all I didn't say anything like that at the Taverners, but then I said it's a deliberate misreporting of something that I said somewhere else that has now been turned into a sort of that's been turned into a meme that is now constantly tweeted, and it isn't representative of what I said, and it's sort of as one of the things that sort of fueled some quite specific death threats that I've been having, and it's exactly the problem where you go, it's a reported speech of something that I didn't say that is now being ascribed to me by a man called Sergey running a bot farm in St. Petersburg. And you go, I don't even know where to begin with dealing with this shit show.
and also in comedy, a lot of it, live comedy in particular, even on radio or television, is about delivery, and you can modulate your voice and you can put tone on things. Written down, in print, things can look terrible that clearly aren't intended like that, and obviously not intended to be written and read off a page. So things are taken out of context, and then as Nish has discovered, they take on a life of their own, and it almost becomes, he's the guy that said you should go and kill your white parents, even though it's come from a misrepresentation of some germ of a routine.
Also, to be fair, some things sound as bad said out loud as they are written down. Me trying to resolve my snafu at the Taverners by saying this is what happens when I perform for an audience largely comprised of people who descended from the people who colonised my ancestors is as bad written down as it went down in the room.
That's what you should do, Marina. You should do an audio book of your columns.
Reading out loud.
Just read them all out loud and see how that goes. But I mean, maybe that's one of the reasons why you have a different experience is you write for The Guardian. I mean, how many of the people how many of the Tories that you ever go at read your column?
Oh, I hope none of them. I mean, I never think of anybody as reading it, really. I just sort of, it's just
Does anyone read Marina's column? There you go.
It's just some jokes about politics. People don't mind jokes about politics in general, though. There's such a tradition of there being sketch writing and all that sort of stuff, which the Americans don't have at all. There's a really good writer who's young, called Alexandra Petrie for the Washington Post, who's sort of doing it in America now, but they just don't have a sketch writing tradition at all, which is such a shame because they're missing out on so much.
Yes, comedy gold.
I mean, they've got a lot of material.
Go on.
In the looking at the below the line comments on articles is...
Why would you do that?
Well, because sometimes I find myself being too optimistic about humanity. And there's more kind of balance of anger under Guardian articles than Telegraph articles. I think the Guardian attracts more people who disagree with it than the Telegraph.
I'm always fascinated by below the line comments on the Guardian because my first thing when I read them is, why are you on the Guardian website? I don't think it's for you. Like, I think it seems to be bringing you more sorrow than, like...
I think they're great. Some of these people write like 5,000 words.
Yeah.
We should hire them. They literally write, it's much longer than the articles.
Stuart Lee has done an anthology of his Observer Brexit columns, and he's like included large chunks of text that have been written to him by absolute psychopaths.
But productive ones, that's the key. In the modern journalism industry, I think we should hire them.
They write a word.
They literally write 8,000 words of comment a day. And they're not, and there's no
And
point
they're
in them being below.
machines.
Yeah,
They're generating hot content.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
I
almost forgot we're having audience questions, so I'm going to just ask one more because we could have kept going with this. Do you think one of the problems for the Labour Party is it's totally and utterly lost its sense of humour?
Yes.
The left has become so deeply self-righteously humourless.
Yes.
That's a problem in politics, and will Keir Starmer be the answer to that?
Defo. Yeah, I'm looking forward to another laugh there.
No, but seriously, I mean, I sometimes look at them and I just...
I don't know, hasn't left always had a sort of earnest streak? Like, hasn't it always... Doesn't it, when you sort of boil both sides down...
Tony Blair had a twinkly smile.
I don't know if I'd describe it as twinkly, more as I would potentially satanic. But I don't know. I feel like the sort of, to use a football term, the sort of ultras of the left and the right have always been slightly humourless about themselves. I mean, I feel like the problem at the moment isn't a left-right divide in terms of, it's just social media and it's just people seeing things without any context, and also the sort of enthusiasm that people take in taking offence online. And I don't think you can confine that disease to one particular side. I think I think
the left has always been more concerned with types of purity.
Yeah, right.
I think that across the world and history, the left has always been more concerned with that, and you can become quite judgmental because of that, and quite humourless.
But it also stops you having a positive or upbeat message, doesn't it? It's just like, oh my God, things are rubbish.
Yeah. But then it's the catch-22, because you sort of go, there is a humourlessness to the left, and yet somehow we cannot find... Jeff Norcott is like the snowflake, like this one right-wing comedian that can be trusted to be funny and not say the N-word. Like, it's, it is interesting because the left is always both humourless, but then predominantly political comedy has also always come from the left. I think what the left doesn't do well, and it's probably a good thing, is that it doesn't absorb its comedians into its campaigning. And I think that is healthy. I think ultimately there should always be a distance between the people you're making jokes about and
definitely.
you. Whereas the right has a slightly chummier relationship on all of those sides.
But if you've got a Prime Minister who is, who uses humour,
yeah,
it's quite important to be able to use it back, isn't it?
Yeah, he's not actually funny though, is he?
Well,
but people know. Some people think. I mean, it may not be to my taste, but some people do find him funny, and lots of people find him funny. And yes, I think when you're dealing with a character like him or even Trump, there's a certain sort of I'm not trying to actually even use it in a particularly pejorative way. There's a slipperiness that you don't actually really know what they're going to say next. And the person to deal with that needs to be quite light and playful and agile in lots of ways to sort of, because they might not be, they're not speaking like conventional politicians. And they can suddenly just sort of laugh things off. And, you sort of feel like, oh, why can't the left laugh some fucking things off? You can, Trump and Johnson can sort of sometimes say things and something that would have been a massive thing, they just kind of laugh away. And I really wish the left would get into that instead of having to have a sort of 19-month post-mortem on every single thing like that. Just to say, oh, I don't know, that was yesterday. Anyway, moving on.
I'm not quite sure about it. I mean, Obama in America, I'm not sure, he wasn't sort of left-wing, but he was... He could be very funny, couldn't he? He was very easy and
correspondence dinner speech.
So I don't know if it just comes down to what group of individuals happen to be in power at the time. So yeah, I'm not sure about that, and I guess there's a danger if you come back with humour, it can backfire on you as well. I don't know. But I do think you will need a leader who is flexible in terms of presentation and tone.
And light of foot, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fleet of foot.
But people are afraid to say things because of social media and, as you see, because of how long the zombie life of the joke, how long it goes. Is it really worth making a joke? That's the sadness, is that you think, God, I mean, is it actually worth these people saying something? Because they're going to be, we've had half the week on someone's dress. I mean, God,
and it's quoted back at you endlessly.
Is it worth it?
So, I mean, you saw this outside of
Which
politics.
Which is a bad
but
situation.
Andy Murray made one joke about not supporting England in a football match about 13 years ago that was, again, sort of offhand, clearly a joke, and it's been used against him, admittedly only by loonies online, but, this guy hates England, for the next decade plus. So it's there is a...
I suppose the worst of all worlds is to script your jokes, a sort of slightly Ed Milibandish approach, which is you read it out.
Yes, I mean, there was one, I remember Nick Clegg... I think it was
Nick Clegg joke.
You remember Nick Clegg?
Well, no, there was one.
The famous Nick Clegg joke.
It was a conference speech.
Yes.
It was before the coalition, and I just remember he did this joke. Said the Conservatives. It was just about them having blue as a colour. He said, but then so do the Smurfs and toilet duck. And you think, who wrote that? Who wrote that? Who then said, yeah, we should definitely use that? And what the fuck was Nick Clegg thinking, seeing it on his script and saying it out loud? So there is a great danger with the ill-advised scripted joke.
Okay, we're going to turn it over to you now. Usual rules. I mean, obviously keep it polite, keep it short if you can, and we'll try and keep this moving at a bit of a pace. And just to warn you, I'm going to group them together so that the poor people with the microphones don't have to sprint up and down these stairs. So I'm going to start. There's anyone in that corner who has a question? Well, there's a gentleman there, and then. Okay, we'll do that bit first, but I will do all the quarters. Have we got microphones that will go in the balconies if necessary? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Regarding this, comedians upsetting one side on the Brexit debate and the other, and then describing themselves, most comedians as they are, on the left. But then there's another divide that could actually decrease your popularity as well further, is that people on the left who support Brexit. Because assume that everyone on the left is pro-Remain is a myth. And you can upset people on the left on your own side as well. And it becomes very sectarian. And also, as regards on the BBC, I mean, you can read The Guardian, The Telegraph, whatever, you choose to buy it. We don't have a choice to buy the BBC, we have to pay the tax. I call it a tax, not a licence. So I object to being preached at with pro-Remainy nonsense, which is 90% of the BBC's comments, including Friday, when they said there were only a few hundred people at Parliament Square, which I think was a lie. The question is, what are your comments about that?
Well, we're all looking at Niche, but that's a bit unfair. Andy.
What I will never understand is why people cannot fucking grasp the Q in a Q&A. If you just want to make a statement, it's not S and A.
No, but all right.
Well, in terms of the Brexit split, and it clearly isn't right and left, but I think that as a comedian, you can't worry about alienating an audience. I think generally you need to think, what do I think about something? What joke do I want to make about it? And you need to have the balls to go through with that. Regardless of whether people agree with it. You might lose audience, you might gain audience, and I would hope that's what most comedians and
you can't focus group it.
Yeah. So, and in terms of the BBC, I think for all the criticism the BBC gets, I think it is one of the more balanced media organisations in the world. And I think one of the best arguments in favour of the BBC is to watch television in any other country. And I find it... it's such a broad organisation that you're not paying for every single thing that that is broadcast. You know, I hate Strictly Come Dancing, but you know, I don't think I should get a refund for that bit of my licence fee that pays for it. I think we just need to be a little more tolerant. I mean, there are arguments you can say that whether there should be an element of consumer choice or not. But I think the argument that you've paid your licence, therefore everything should be to your liking is it's a risky road to go down.
Yeah, I would also say the BBC comedy output is very broad. I mean, I don't think you can make the case. There is so much apolitical comedy that exists. The actual political comedy constitutes quite a small output of the BBC's comedy. I don't think you could possibly ascribe political motivations.
It's a tiny amount, really.
Yeah, it's a tiny amount. You couldn't
Less than ever in a lot of ways, I think.
Absolutely. And you couldn't ascribe a political philosophy to a show like Fleabag. You couldn't ascribe a political motivation to Mrs. Brown's Boys. It caters for a much broader remit. I mean, listen, you can laugh. Mrs. Brown's Boys is a beloved television programme and is an important part of why we have the British Broadcasting Corporation, because it caters for a broad variety of tastes. And you can object to it, but the reality is that it provides a lot of opportunity and platform for, if you can't find, I'm not even going to talk about the local news, I'm not even going to talk about the drama output, I'm not even going to talk about the documentary output. Let's leave that for 1 second. But if you can't find across the comedic output of the BBC something that you like between me, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, Mrs. Brown's Boys, The Office, then Still Open All Hours, Only Fools and Horses, Fawlty Towers, then it's possible that you don't understand comedy.
Before we just raise your hand in that. One thing I would add to that is just an interesting nerdy point about Mrs. Brown Boys is there is a very high correlation between people who like Mrs. Brown Boys and people who voted Leave. Matt Chorley of the Times did some polling around this.
I saw that.
It was quite interesting that actually it is one of those programmes that divides people along that particular division. I don't know why, I've never actually watched it.
Which is fascinating again, because that, to me, it's not something that I necessarily find funny, but I understand that the licence fee should go to a broad range of programming. And the existence of something like Mrs. Brown's Boys, the existence of something like Strictly Come Dancing, is part of the BBC's remit to be a publicly funded entertainment broadcast unit. And, the figures don't lie. The most watched entertainment programme in this country is Strictly Come Dancing Saturday Night Show. The second most watched entertainment programme is Strictly Come Dancing Sunday Night Show.
And then the MASH report, is it?
It's a big drop off to bronze.
The lady with the glasses with her hand up. I'm going to trust the people with the mics just to, keep them gentle.
After Trump was elected, my son said that, he's a much, much younger person than me by definition, but he said...
That's comedy, mate. Yeah. Look at that, that's comedy.
He said it was a mistake for us to keep joking about Trump, because what Trump is, and Johnson similarly, is just much too serious to joke about. And what we needed to do was to take him seriously, understand what it is that he's doing. And he's not joking. I mean, he thinks about what he does, and he knows that what he's doing has traction. And so maybe, much as I love the comedy and all of you and everybody else, maybe we have done ourselves a disservice by regarding Trump as some sort of a horrible, nasty joke that one day will disappear down the plug hole.
Are there some things that are too serious to joke about?
No, there's nothing that's too serious to joke about. But if you look at actually American news coverage, an incredibly small amount of it is devoted to joking at all about Trump. He is covered in all sorts of ways. You may disagree with lots of the ways he is covered, and they don't have a BBC over there, so you certainly hear some interesting ways he's covered. But I don't think people should. I think people must be able to joke about people like that, absolutely, and I think it's very dangerous if you can't. But the vast majority of coverage is not comedy at all.
Also, I think that comedy can be extremely serious. You can make jokes about people.
Yes.
And clearly, there's a lot of very superficial jokes about Trump, as there was about George W. Bush, as there was about Boris Johnson, but you can do extremely serious journalistic comedy of the type that Nish was talking about earlier on, that he does on the MASH report, that we see a lot of in America. Reginald D. Hunter, the American comedian who's had most of his career over here, he used to have a line in his stand-up show that paraphrased something that Aristophanes, the ancient Greek comic writer, wrote.
You're not going to do this in Greek.
Not in Greek, but in about 400 BC. And what Reginald D. Hunter said was, your politicians won't tell you the truth, your religious leaders won't tell you the truth, your newspapers won't tell you the truth. The only people who'll tell you the truth are comedians, and the only reason that you'll let us do it is because you think we're bullshitting. And that was not word for word, but it paraphrased something that was said by a satirist of 2,500 years before. And there is an element in which comedic satire can be funny but deeply serious and come with a degree of journalistic rigour and objectivity. So there's a sort of danger in sort of saying just because you're joking about it means that you're not taking it seriously. I don't think that's the case.
So do you sometimes think, Marina, that you can come out in a sense with analysis that your colleagues on the news pages can't, because yours is dressed in humour?
I would speak for myself that the more I used to write columns with not where I'd not try to tell not quite so many jokes, but in a way, the more jokes I've tried to tell, I've actually ended up having better, I hope, political points out of those, because trying to make a joke and sort of come across the thing that actually works and is was what you think is a joke. You get it and you think, oh yeah, okay, that's it. You have to sort of pick it apart in a different way, and when you sort of put it back together and it sort of works, you think, actually that's what I think about that. And I've found that I've had better points to make the less seriously I've made them.
One of the things that if I may praise my fellow panellists for a second, that I've always admired about Marina's writing and that I've always admired about Andy's work, which I've been a fan of for a long time, is that they all, I'm 34 years old and I very much came of age in the era of Jon Stewart hosting The Daily Show. And they're, as much as Jon Stewart has always been very funny, there was always a deadly seriousness. And I would say that both Marina and Andy are both capable of making jokes about something where you are in no doubt of the sort of moral conviction, even if it's not necessarily declaring for a side, which I think can be counterproductive to political comedy. But if you have the comedy that both these people do, and lots of people that I grew up admiring do, comes with a very strong sense of moral conviction behind it, and there is a strong morality to a lot of it, and it's about doing jokes that, like Andy says, doesn't just say, well, he's a silly orange man and he says lots of silly things. Like, I came of age in the nascent era of email forwards, when you were getting email forwards about silly things George Bush had said, and the reason that we were all drawn to someone like Jon Stewart is because he was trying to do comedy that went, one layer further and was able to be funny without ever letting these kind of figures off the hook. And I do think there is a way to tread that line.
I'm 34 years old. What a total bastard. He didn't need to. I mean, it was an unnecessary line. I can see a sort of disembodied hand up there, and I feel I ought to give the balcony a go.
It's like the viewers' gallery at the Old Bailey.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I was quite conflicted about which way to vote during the Brexit vote. One of the things that disappointed me was the lack of information and the lack of sensible debate. I was wondering why tonight, when this is a thing about Europe, every benchmark you did about culturally was with America. You didn't benchmark a single thing, compare us to any European country. That's true of the media. It's very terrible. There's terrible coverage about what cultural life is like in Europe. Everything is about Trump. Every comedy is about Trump. Is about America. It just seems that if we're passionate about Europe, where's the passion? The passion is for Donald Trump, and the passion is for America. Do you think so?
Well, we share the language, which is a huge thing. And if you think of how much of our culture is influenced by America, we've always had that kind of that Atlanticist relationship is always going to be very strong because we share the language, and so you've got that instant way of understanding the jokes, which we don't obviously we don't have in Europe, and actually Europe are much better understanding our jokes because they all spoke English, whereas we're pretty hopeless at everyone else's language.
Yeah, I think that as much as this panel is supposedly about Europe, it's also about comedy, and when we have shared language and shared cultural reference, that's maybe why we've talked a lot more about Trump, and that's why we end up talking a lot about him. Also, he poses an existential threat to a lot of us on a number of different levels. You know, there is a reason that we're drawn to him and we're compelled to him, and it isn't just to do with the fact that he's a sort of larger-than-life celebrity figure. The reality is that he's a figurehead of a sort of growing far-right movement. And I mean, I agree that in the lead-up to the EU referendum, the information around what was going on in Europe, the standard of debate wasn't up to scratch. But I think you should lay that on the door of... I think the Remain campaign bears a lot of the responsibility for that. You know, I do think that there wasn't enough conversation about Europe.
And I mean, Andy, to his credit, has been talking about long dead Greeks.
Yeah.
Have you not heard any of that? Come on, mate.
Well, I think when it comes to Brexit, I think there was a severe lack of an emotional case for Remain, in the way that there was a very strong emotional case for Brexit, and I don't think Cameron and the rest on the Remain side made that case nearly as strongly. And it is this bizarre thing where you talk about all the complicated details, but it's also a very simple emotional thing. So there's different sides to it. I think that's made it such a complicated political issue and a complicated comedic issue in a lot of ways, because you've got to deal with these two very, very different but inextricable sides of the issue. The sort of the technical, technocratic side of it, the economic details and the speculation, and the raw emotion of it for people who sort of feel European, people who feel that we shouldn't be in the EU. So I think that's possibly been one of the failings, particularly on the Remain side, probably comedically and politically.
On language, I don't know if you all saw that story about the Croatian diplomat in the last meeting in Brussels, who said "good riddance" to the British ambassador, thinking it meant a fond farewell. So I mean, there's who can I say? There's a lack of them. That's my eyesight.
There's
a lady there in the. Oh God, I'm sorry. I'm making you come up. I'm doing what I said I wouldn't do, aren't I? Sorry. There's a lady there in the middle.
It's where you need a drone with a microphone on it to pilot the room.
So I wanted to ask, if you think of the decades of things like Bremer, Bird and Fortune and Yesminster and cartoonists in newspapers who have had such a rich seam of comedy to draw on from the Europe, whether it's your bent bananas or whatever else it is, or defence and dogs and everything else. So what are we going to do now?
I don't think we'll be short of material, funnily enough.
Yeah, not with Mark Francois becoming a prominent politician in this country. I don't think we're going to be. I don't think we're going to be.
It's surfaced some great characters. We've had a whole. There's some really interesting people that people had no idea were MPs, and are now like, wow, that.
So who's the funniest politician? I mean, both. I mean, in either
in
sense,
terms
the
of
one
being a joke?
the one who's the best comedian, and the one in the sense of who's the best to laugh at.
Francois is a glorious character.
He's a brilliant. Cummings is a good character. He's come late to the franchise, but I'm into him. He's a good character.
Cummings looks too much like the main guy from The Nightmare Before Christmas. Like, I find him there's something whenever he's on TV, I'm like, ugh, God, that guy gives me the creeps. Why is he wearing 3 scarves? No one's ever that cold. I don't think that we're sure. A lot of the comedy about the EU from the Bendy Bananas was written by a young Times columnist who now has had a career change. So I think we'll not be short of material.
But it will be interesting, I mean, because that you know, politically, I guess it's always been a convenient scapegoat, and yeah, we're going to have to jab that finger of blame in our own eyeballs a bit more than we have.
But also,
I would also just say that my experience of doing political comedy in sort of 2013, 14 and 15 was that it was harder to do because people didn't care. A lot of the, you know, when you're doing like club stand-up, I mean, you were doing it in harder conditions than I did even then, but, you know, even in 2013, 14, 15, on a Friday and Saturday night in a comedy club, standing on stage and going, well, the government, people just didn't give a shit. In a way, it is easier to do political comedy now because people care and people know
definitely.
who you're talking about. You know, if we, you know, whoever Mark Francois's equivalent was in 2012, I don't even know who that was. But semi-obscure figures, everyone's engagement levels have increased, and it is a shame that has happened after the thing we really needed people to be engaged in. You know, the horse has bolted and is being ridden bareback by Nigel Farage. But it's sort of a shame but now it is easier to do political comedy than it's ever been because people care about politics, have an investment in it. You don't have to spend 5 minutes explaining who everyone is, and people want to hear it more, I think.
I'd agree with that. I mean, there was an element of that in around the time of the Iraq War, that it put you know, a big global issue into the forefront of people's minds. So you know, it, as Nish was saying, it's more about, you know, having topics that you can, you know, go straight into your jokes about, rather than having to do you know, a background. One of the shows I saw early in my stand-up career that I found most inspiring was Robert Newman did a show that was all about kind of global capitalism. It was probably about 2000, I think, and it was, you know, he had to do a lot of sort of explaining of what he was about to make jokes about, and I guess now that, you know, probably with the economic crisis, that sort of helped, you know, put economic issues in the front of people's minds for a while, and obviously with Brexit as well. So I think it has been a time in which you know, political comedy has been, as Nish said, easier to do, just in the sense that there are more major political issues that are live in your audience's mind.
But also, I think in terms of mainstream political comedy, we don't tell jokes about the EU. We tell jokes about the Germans and they're not going away. We tell jokes about the war, don't we? I mean, that's all still there. And in effect, I mean, none of that is going to change.
And also, your immediate target is always going to be your Prime Minister and your government. And if Conservative people want more conservative comedy, I suggest getting the fuck out of government. Like, the truth is that it is always going to tack a certain way, because the instinct for political comedians is always going to be start at the government and then work from there.
Right, I'm going to go over onto this side now. Just the nearest hand up to you. Let's do it that way.
This is why democracy doesn't work.
This is why it does work, on the contrary.
Do you think that left-wing comedians have a responsibility to try and appeal to the right wing in terms of to try and breach this very divided society that we found ourselves in?
Well, it's very hard to talk about the responsibility of comedians because
that's a no then.
Well, no, I don't know to ascribe it with a social function is risky, I think. But like I said, I think what you can ask for from comedians is that they've really thought about it and they've had the courage to sort of, make a joke and stand by that and have thought it through, and not to just go for easy jokes, knee-jerk reactions. But if a comedian thinks passionately on a certain subject, you can't expect them to pretend that they don't think that in order to reach across a divide. I think that's not necessarily the responsibility of comedians. But I do think that, particularly as Nish was saying on the BBC, you need to be aware of that and the need. You want to try and if you're making a pro-Remain joke or an anti-Conservative joke, anti-Boris Johnson joke, you want to do it in such a way that you would hope that someone who disagrees with it would still find it funny. But I don't know if there's a social responsibility in that sense.
Yeah, I think you go down a sticky road when you start thinking comedians have a social responsibility, because that ends with comedians who already have egos that are absolutely out of control. Like, it's literally like North Korean dictator stand-up comedian, and there is not, in terms of vanity, there is not as big a gap between those two as I would be comfortable with. But I definitely think on the BBC you feel a certain responsibility. You're taking the licence fee, you feel a certain responsibility. Whereas ultimately, like, when you're doing stand-up in a club, your only responsibility is to make the audience laugh.
Just get off a line.
Just get, get off sans bread.
Yeah.
You agree, Marina?
Yes, I do. No, yes, I do. I don't think you can start thinking. I mean, you've just got to say what you've got to say what you think, and it's quite. I do try. It's quite good if you feel that you can. It's quite good. I always like it if people on different sides write and say they like something. And you can get on with them. I much prefer that, actually, than feeling like I've really sort of played to this particular gallery today, because in a way that's easier. I mean, it's better to kind of stand outside it all and try and be a bit more equal opportunities.
And
It's
the flip
it
side,
also
yeah,
felt
yeah.
like such a mess, certainly for the last sort of. Now it feels, in lots of people's minds, much more resolved. But when we were into the sort of third year of it all, it was such a mess that equal opportunities offence was probably the way to go.
Oh, there's not a huge amount
you
of
really
goods.
couldn't say anyone had covered themselves
Yeah,
at any point by that stage.
And presumably the flip side, if you're getting abused by both sides.
Oh, I think all the imposters have got to be treated the same. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I've devolved authority to you now to give the microphone to whoever you want to give it to. Near
The will of the people must be respected.
I can't see that far. This is the problem.
Good Lord, sir! Congratulations on that, Tash.
William Keegan of the Observer. This is a question not addressed to my colleague Marina, but to the two of you in the middle. Have you ever been approached by political parties and asked to work for them? And if so, what was your answer, or what would it be if it happened? I ask this because John Fortune once told me that when New Labour came in, he was approached by somebody on behalf of New Labour and asked to work for them. And he said, no, I'm going to carry on attacking you. And then some dubious character said, well, just watch your tax affairs.
Wow.
That's fairly
Have you ever been approached
Just
by a
say
politician?
Alistair Campbell.
I was asked. I was standing in an Ireland Sainsbury's, and I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognise. Answered my phone, and the voice said, "Hello, it's Krishnan Guru Murthy here." I'd never met Krishnan Guru Murthy, and he said, "Would you like to write some jokes for David Miliband?" And it was the weirdest phone conversation I've ever had. And he's got
Krishnan moonlighting as an agent.
I can't remember. There was some
There's so many questions.
some connection. I can't remember. It was his brother or something was working in it, and he'd done some stuff with Jason Manford, who I'd done some writing for.
Yes.
Anyway, so that's how they contacted me. But so I was asked to write for David Miliband, but no, I didn't.
David Miliband's gag man.
Well, exactly. That is a
That's a CV.
yeah.
I can't believe you said that.
That is a thankless job.
I think you're one of the finest joke writers of all time, Andrew. I don't back you to get that job right.
But no, I think
There's some things you can do nothing with.
yeah, and also as a comedian, you compromise your neutrality and objectivity if you write for a specific person or or you do an advertisement for a specific organisation. I think so. There's even at my level of the game where it just, no one's going to notice. I didn't feel I wouldn't have felt comfortable doing that.
But is there a politician you'd love to have been asked to write jokes for?
Well, I'd love to write jokes for Trump or Boris Johnson and get them to say things that they really don't want to say. But
I've been approached a couple of times to do stuff for Labour, and I've said no because
By specific politicians or the party? Or
no, the
comedians?
party generally. But I take a BBC wage, and I currently, certainly in April we're doing another series. How much longer that lasts for is anybody's guess. But largely because they have no money, because the government is terrible. But I take the BBC thing very seriously, and I don't think that I should. And also, my political views are pretty evident, but I just don't feel like I don't think I should be shilling for a particular party. I think that there's something about you have to maintain some level of independence if you're writing comedy about politics. I don't think it's any secret what my political preferences are, but I think that feels like a slippery slope. And
Marina, you must have been asked
to
provide lines for
No,
politicians.
never. I mean,
Really?
no, never. I mean, obviously a lot of
Maybe they don't
journalists
want to be as
do
mean
work
as
for
you
political
are.
parties.
Right.
There are so many journalists, there are so many columnists working for political parties unofficially that I feel I don't need to be one of those at all.
Okay. This devolved system works well.
Also, it's a shit gig. The money's fucking rancid.
Actually, my
Allegedly.
question comes off the back of that, actually. I was going to say that political comedians or politicians write comedy to make them more attractive to the public. If you could, what joke would you write for Boris Johnson in one of his speeches?
Oh.
What's the Trojan horse, to continue your fondness for?
I'm not...
I almost want to leave
that's-
you with that for a few
Yeah,
minutes.
that-
I'll do another couple of questions and come back to it.
Yeah, might need to think about that for a bit.
Yeah,
I think.
all right.
Yeah.
Don't let me forget.
Hi. So I was wondering if you thought, all of you, the feeling of sort of Remainer snobbishness in comedy, is that the concession prize we get for being on the losing side of the biggest constitutional decision of a generation, or does it make everything worse?
What do you reckon?
I think the time has come for moving past the last 3.5 years. Yeah, I have actually enjoyed everyone being quite mad. It really did throw everything up in the air to watch people. I mean, really extraordinary things happened. So many extraordinary things happened. Even writing about it, I remember thinking, you know, in the old days, you know, I was writing about something in 2006, some small thing would happen and you'd dine out on it as a columnist for about 3 weeks. Then you think, there was one day where Boris Johnson was sent didn't go to the dispatch box to talk about the technology lessons he had around the lap dancing pole in Jennifer Arcuri's flat, and he sent some like junior minister to go and do it. And they had to go and answer the questions about the technology. And I remember by the end of the day, so many other things happened. I was like, I've got no one to fucking mention that. It's like, oh my God, I mean, in the old days, this would have been like, so, I mean, it has been quite funny in lots of ways.
I feel like there was a year's worth of columns about the duck pond.
Oh my God, there was so much.
It was a halcyon era of low-level corruption.
The things that you just let lie and couldn't even write about because there were so many things.
I mean, there has been a relish about your columns that hasn't been there since the good old days
you've
of the
got to
IOC.
laugh, haven't
which,
you?
we talked about before, when the IOC was being revealed for what it was, that was the last time that...
Well, yes. I mean, there's been so much happening, and people have been really engaged. It's hilarious thinking that, like, the viewing figures for things like BBC Parliament, you know, every night you'd be like, oh, I'm watching another vote. You know, why? You know, it's the golden age of television. You know, what? Go and watch Fleabag or something. No, I've got to watch the vote. I've got to watch the vote. It was crazy.
You know, a year ago, BBC Parliament outstripped MTV for the first time. Absolutely,
That's
literally.
incredible. I didn't know.
year.
That's brilliant.
They got select committees on big screens in Hyde Park, didn't they?
Times Square.
I went to see someone who was doing a show in Worcester, and that was explained why I was in a hotel in Worcester at 3:30 in the afternoon. And there was the Supreme Court hearing into the proroguing decision. And there were people in a Worcester hotel with pints round the telly who weren't talking to each other. They were all separate. They won't come together. They were watching the Supreme Court on Sky News at 3:30 on a Tuesday. And I was like, okay, we've gone into, we're so far down the rabbit hole now. What's happening?
I do think that is a really interesting point, and I do sometimes worry that the concession this is the concession prize, is that we, you know, largely because I've been doing specifically political comedy exclusively under a Conservative government, and I've always worried that I'm your concession prize. Bad luck, everyone.
Is that because you're only 34?
I guess I am one of the cooler millennials. I'll see you all on TikTok later.
Nothing wrong with TikTok.
It will be very interesting to see both comedically and politically that we're in this phase at the moment where the kind of 3.5 years of kind of furious argument have ended, but it'll be interesting to see how soon in the process of Brexit actually being got done that people start to get angry again, or if it might work out better than people are expecting. And politically, it's very interesting that Boris Johnson had won an election, but on a sort of shallow lent support from people who wouldn't traditionally support the Conservatives, and he's going to have to deliver for them. And they're going to have to start thinking about younger generation who are becoming voters, who've had a decision that will affect their entire lives taken without them having any input in it. So politics is going to have to play to those constituencies, and it'll be interesting. It'll be a challenge comedically to find those sort of fresh angles as that side of our political discourse evolves.
I think you've got a while to prepare, though.
Got a few weeks off.
Yeah. There's a couple down this side.
The way that your hand is up, it's like you're pointing at him. It's really nice.
Well, we'll get you the microphone in a sec. I've completely forgotten the thing we were saving to the end.
I really feel like we've glossed over William Keegan's moustache. Holy hell. That is magnificent, sir.
It's glorious.
Congrats.
That's pretty good.
Huh?
The
beard's impressive. This is what happens when I am not on television.
And Nish made a point earlier about obscure political figures, which I thought was a good segue into Labour. What do you forecast for the future of the Labour Party politically and comedically?
You're the journalist, mate. I don't know why you're looking at me.
Well, I think they probably could do with getting their act a bit closer together than it is right now. I mean, it's really uninspiring. I do find it's like watching some, completely obscure reality show in a language you don't even understand, where all this other stuff is happening, and then that people are just saying, well, I don't think people should be able to call you at the weekend, and you're just like, oh my God, really? Yeah. I mean, I think they should probably... There's only 2 more months of it, though, so who knows what we'll feel by... I do think that they haven't realised that I was watching James Carville on a show talking about the Iowa caucus, actually, but Labour was just being used as a sort of as a byword for like, hey, this is when things go really wrong, and I think that point has been got by a lot of people, even globally, but not the Labour Party at the moment. But I hope that they come back stronger, but at the moment I'm not feeling.
As a columnist, do you have a particular outcome that you'd like to see of the leadership election?
What with at the moment?
Well,
no, I mean,
easier. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I like Lisa Nandy, but I suppose it will be Starmer, will it? I mean,
No, I don't mean in terms of politics. I mean in terms of joke potential for you in your columns. I mean.
Oh, I think there'll be plenty of joke potential, so I wouldn't worry about that bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just fucking draw a face on some cardboard and put it in the dispatch box. Like, it's regardless of these, the inter-Labour Party squabbling, the reality is that the country democratically needs a functioning opposition. As we go into this period where Boris Johnson's like, stopped saying the word Brexit like it's Voldemort, and it's going to be absolutely essential that his actions are scrutinised over the next year. He's already today he's agreeing that he's going to deport a plane load of Jamaican citizens from the country. This is already the start of what I feel is going to be a hard right power grab in terms of deregulation economically, and regressive in terms of race relations, minority rights, women's rights. the most important thing for this country right now is that there is a functioning opposition to scrutinise the government. I don't give a shit about their fucking squabbling anymore. Like, I've got no tolerance for it. Pick someone, start working.
Andy?
Yeah,
You're going to make the case for them not having a leader. So.
Well, I'd broadly agree with that. I don't know which of the. I mean, it's kind of hard to know what style of leader is required. But it needs to be someone who can, provide a strong opposition, either in the sense that with a personality clash against Boris Johnson. Or, I mean, with Keir Starmer, obviously he's an elite lawyer to bring a kind of forensic examination of what the government's doing. I'd have loved to see Jess Phillips up against Boris Johnson. I think that would have been pyrotechnic, and I've got a lot of time for her. So I don't know, but it's a strange time in that there was a large majority, but on a strange kind of support that that may dissolve or may transfer on a longer term basis. But Labour has to fulfil its function as the opposition. I would hope that they will start campaigning for electoral reform, because I think a lot of our political problems stem from the fact that we have a deeply unrepresentative democracy and unelected second chamber. And there seems to be a number of easy fixes that could make our democracy more representative, more functional. But that doesn't really suit either the Conservatives or Labour historically. So I think we're probably stuck with it.
Was the question we parked, what joke would you like to write about Trump? Was that?
For
Boris Johnson. Does anyone? This is like your caption round.
God, it's quite hard to write a joke on the spot, particularly in the midst of quite a serious discussion.
Is he telling it against himself? You're just kind of fooling him into saying something.
I spent quite a lot of time. I spent a lot of time reading Boris Johnson's comedic columns, and I would just like to write a joke for him that isn't racist, because based on my reading of his columns, the man is incapable of. The guy is like a hair's breadth away from Davidson. His idea of a joke is to use the word pickaninnies and the phrase watermelon smiles. So for me, I would just write him a nice knock-knock joke, and where the answer is not a person of colour.
Yeah, it is. Well, unless it's knock-knock, who's there? It's the immigration authorities. I'd probably write a long-form conversation between Boris Johnson and a child who hasn't been born yet, who's going to have to deal with his legacy.
Oh, I don't know what I think for me the best joke is that he's got everything he wanted, and it's quite obviously quite awful. Like, this whole city used to be his playground, and he's got a girl in every postcode, and now he's got to go to sleep in the same room every night with 2 policemen outside his door. I want him to be Prime Minister forever. It's perfect. I'm going to keep voting for him again and again. It's like, I don't want to do it anymore. Oh, fuck off back inside and be Prime Minister for a bit longer. He's being Prime Minister to death. Like the characters in Seven, like the guy who has to keep eating and he's strapped in. And he's just being Prime Minister in that little house in Westbury. He's being Prime Minister to death. So I'm enjoying the general joke. Stay there forever.
If nothing else, his tenure at number 10 will keep his number of children down. Let's keep it in double figures, Boris.
So many coppers outside the bedroom door. So many.
Well, on that note, I'm afraid we've run out of time. I have to just say we have a rather different sort of event on Monday, which I think is sold out, but you can follow it online, which is about British foreign policy after Brexit, which will be very different in tone, but I think rather good. And in the meantime, can I just ask you to say thank you to Marina Hyde, Nish Kumar and Andy Bolton. You get roots and everything. You never get roots. We just wander off.
It's the only consolation with him and Trump is that they're both clearly having such a bad
It's so
time.
great.
Right, it's
It's so
so
great.
much fun.
Am I meant to say? Oh yeah, I forgot to say. Sorry, there is a drinks reception upstairs on the 8th floor. Sorry about that. Forgot that bit.
Our curry is surely like good.